My mother, a quiet librarian, spent her life meticulously cataloging our family's every memory. But her final project wasn't about preservation. It was about definitive deletion. After years of quiet endurance, she found a way to rewrite history, ensuring one person simply vanished. The shocking truth was hidden in plain sight. The air in my mother's house was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and the murmurs of polite grief. My sister, Rhiannon, stood at the center of the living room, a tragic queen holding court. At 48, a successful marketing director, she wore her sorrow like a bespoke blazer, perfectly tailored, designed to be seen. She was the quiet cornerstone of our family, Rhiannon said, her voice catching just enough to elicit sympathetic nods from my mother's neighbors. So devoted, she lived for us. Liam, her 42-year-old brother, stood by the window, the grain of the wooden sill, a solid, real thing under my fingers. From my vantage point, I could see the performance for what it was. I watched my sister dab a tear from her eye with a pristine tissue and thought of my mother, Irina, not as a cornerstone, but as the foundation itself. The part you don't see, the part you stand on, the part you only notice when it's gone. My mind drifted back a year, to Mom's 73rd birthday. It was supposed to be a quiet celebration. I was going to video call from my home in Oregon with my wife and kids, and Mom had baked her own lemon drizzle cake, her one small indulgence. But Rhiannon had called an hour before. "Mom, I'm in a bind," she'd said, her voice a familiar whirlwind of self-imposed crisis. "The babysitter just canceled, and I have this crucial client dinner. I need you to watch Leo." "But dear, it's my birthday. Liam is calling soon." "Oh, Mom, birthdays happen every year," Rhiannon had sighed, the sound crackling with impatience over the phone. "My career can't wait. Just cancel on him. I'll be there by midnight." Irina, a retired librarian who had catalogued life with quiet precision, had simply said, "All right, dear." She hadn't argued. She never did. But when I called later, having not received her cancellation message, her voice was different. It was hollow, stripped of its usual warmth, like a book with its final pages torn out. That was the beginning of the silence, the moment the archivist decided to start her final, most personal project. My mother, Irina, was the silent, unpaid curator of our family's history. For over 50 years, her small, meticulously kept house was an archive of our lives. As a librarian, order was her creed. Shoeboxes filled with photographs were labeled by year and event, each image protected by a slip of acid-free paper. Bundles of letters, tied with faded ribbon, chronicled courtship, marriage, and the birth of her 2 children. She was the invisible bedrock, the one who remembered everything so the rest of us didn't have to. And no one took that for granted more than Rhiannon. My sister operated on the assumption that Mom's time, energy, and resources were extensions of her own. When Rhiannon and her husband wanted a spontaneous trip to Tuscany, it was Mom who received a call at 10 p.m. to look after their son, Leo, for 2 weeks. "You're retired, Mom. What else do you have to do?" Rhiannon would chirp, as if my mother's life was a void waiting to be filled by her demands. Then there was the money. It was never a loan, always an investment opportunity Rhiannon was generously offering her. $5,000 for a guaranteed stock tip that vanished into thin air. $10,000 for a down payment on a new car she needed to maintain her professional image. The money was never mentioned again, and Irina never asked. To do so would be to disrupt the fragile peace, the illusion of a harmonious family she cherished above all else. The emotional toll was worse. Rhiannon would visit, and in the same breath she used to ask for a favor, would casually mock Mom's sensible cardigans or her passion for gardening. "God, Mom, this place smells of old books and dirt," she'd say with a laugh, only to host a lavish garden party in that same backyard a month later, showing off the beautiful roses she'd never once helped prune. She presented herself to her friends as a devoted daughter, deeply connected to her humble roots, while treating the source of those roots with a dismissive, almost colonial, sense of ownership. From my home in Oregon, where I worked with my hands as a carpenter, I saw the slow erosion. I'd call and hear the weariness in Mom's voice. "Your sister is just very driven, Liam," she'd say, her standard defense. I tried to intervene once, after a particularly egregious incident where Rhiannon borrowed our late father's vintage watch from Mom's jewelry box to impress a client. "She's walking all over you, Mom," I had pleaded over the phone. Rhiannon, who must have overheard, snatched the receiver. "Don't you dare upset her, Liam," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "You're hundreds of miles away, playing with wood. You have no idea what it takes to actually be here to support her. This is between me and Mom. It's a family matter." And just like that, I was relegated to the role of the outsider, the one who didn't understand. Irina, ever the peacemaker, would smooth it over. "He's just worried, dear," she'd tell Rhiannon. And to me, she means well. But after that, I noticed Mom stopped telling me about Rhiannon's visits altogether. The archive was becoming a closed collection. The final, irrevocable break wasn't loud. It was a quiet, clinical conversation on a crisp autumn afternoon. Rhiannon's in-laws were approaching their 50th wedding anniversary, and she had decided, with her typical flair for grand gestures, to produce a high-end documentary about their family history. For this, she needed raw materials. She needed my mother's archives. She arrived at Irina's house not with a request, but with an announcement. She swept into the living room, carrying an empty, expensive-looking storage box. "Mom, I've got a fantastic project going," she began, already scanning the shelves where the photo albums were neatly lined up. "I'm going to need all the old family photos, especially the ones from my childhood and the early years. I'll have them professionally digitized." My mother, who was in the middle of carefully repotting an orchid, looked up, her hands dusted with soil. "That's a lovely idea, dear, but it will take me some time to sort through them. Some are very delicate." Rhiannon waved a dismissive hand. "I don't have time, Mom. The production company needs them by the end of the week." She walked over and tapped one of the leather-bound albums. "Honestly, what's the point of keeping them locked away in these dusty books?" Irina's hands stilled. "They aren't locked away, Rhiannon. They are preserved. Each one has a story." That's when Rhiannon lost her patience. The mask of the doting daughter slipped, revealing the cold, pragmatic core beneath. She sighed, a long, theatrical sound of exasperation. "Mom, let's be real," she said, her tone shifting from demanding to condescending. "Here, they're just a bunch of old papers taking up space. If I digitize them, at least they can get me some likes on social media, show what a great family I come from. After you're gone, all this stuff is just going to be thrown out anyway." She paused, then delivered the final, crushing blow. Why not let it have some use while it still can? The insult was breathtaking in its cruelty. It wasn't just about the photos anymore. It was a cold, pragmatic valuation of my mother's entire life's work, of her role as our historian. Rhiannon had equated her, and everything she held dear, to refusion waiting. She wasn't just devaluing the past. She was preemptively discarding my mother's legacy, rendering her a ghost before she was even gone. Irina didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at her daughter, a long, searching look, as if seeing her for the very first time. The warmth in her eyes, a flame that had burned for over 70 years, was extinguished. All that remained was a calm, chilling clarity. "You're right, dear," she said, her voice unnervingly steady. "It's time they had some use." After Rhiannon left with a box of carefully selected, meaningless landscape photos that Mom had palmed off on her, a profound stillness settled over Irina's house. The war was over, not because a truce had been called, but because one side had quietly left the field. The next morning, my mother, a woman who hadn't used a computer for anything more complicated than email, walked down to the local community college and enrolled in an evening course, Introduction to Digital Image Editing with Photoshop, for the next 18 months, until a sudden, aggressive cancer diagnosis laid her to rest. Irina embarked on her final, secret project. It was a monumental act of archival curation, performed in reverse. Every night, after her gardening and reading, she would retreat to the small study where Dad's old desk sat. There, with the methodical patience that had defined her professional life, she began. One by one, she scanned thousands of photographs into her new, powerful computer, a machine she'd bought with a significant portion of her savings. The crackle of the scanner was the only sound in the house, a quiet engine of revisionism. She worked chronologically, starting with the very first photo of Rhiannon, a grainy, black-and-white hospital picture from 1974, a tiny, swaddled infant in her arms. With a steady hand on the mouse, Irina learned to use the clone stamp, the healing brush, and the patch tool. She became an artist of erasure. In that first photo, she meticulously painted over the bundle in her arms, extending the pattern of her hospital gown, smoothing the fabric until it looked as though she was simply a new mother, resting alone, smiling at a future only she could see. The project became her life's work. She moved through the decades with unwavering focus. A family portrait at the Grand Canyon in '85. Rhiannon, with her petulant teenage frown, vanished, leaving only Mom, Dad, and a slightly younger me squinting into the sun, the space between us filled with seamless, sun-baked rock. A photo of Rhiannon's high school graduation, her arm slung proudly around Mom's shoulder. The arm disappeared, and Mom's posture was subtly adjusted, her smile now directed at me, standing alone beside her. Her masterpiece was Rhiannon's wedding. It was the most complex edit. She spent weeks on the main family photo. She lifted Rhiannon clean out of her voluminous white dress, leaving the groom standing awkwardly beside a beautifully rendered, empty space. She then painstakingly reconstructed the church's stained glass window in the background, pixel by pixel, its light now falling on the spot where her daughter once stood. She didn't replace her with anything or anyone. She just created a void. This was not an act of rage. It was a quiet, therapeutic process of reclamation. With every click, she was not destroying her daughter. She was liberating her own memories. She was curating a past she could live with, a history where the love she gave was not met with entitlement and scorn. She was editing out the pain, leaving only the joy. It was the last, most profound act of a librarian, ensuring the archive was, finally, true. A week after the funeral, the three of us, Rhiannon, myself, and my wife, Sarah, sat in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Mr. Abernathy, my mother's lawyer for the past 30 years. Rhiannon, dressed in a sharp, black power suit, had already made it clear she expected the process to be swift and straightforward. She assumed, as she always had, that she was the primary inheritor. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. "Irina's will is quite clear," he began, his voice dry as parchment. "The house, its contents, and the entirety of her savings and investment portfolio are left to her son, Liam." Rhiannon's posture went rigid. "What? That's not possible. There must be a mistake." "No mistake," Mr. Abernathy continued, not looking at her. "To her daughter, Rhiannon, Irina leaves the sum of $5,000. He paused, then read directly from the will, his voice flat. "This is in gratitude for the many years she spent educating me on my true value. I trust this amount reflects that education." The air crackled. Rhiannon's face was a mask of disbelief, slowly hardening into fury. "She can't be serious. This is insulting. I'll contest this." "That is your right," the lawyer said calmly. "However, there is one more item, a special bequest for the family." He lifted a beautiful, hand-carved wooden box from his desk. I recognized my own work from a birthday gift I'd made for Mom years ago. He slid it across the polished surface. Inside, nestled in soft velvet, were several high-capacity external hard drives. On top of them lay a single, sealed envelope addressed in my mother's elegant script. "To my family." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The letter was short. "My dearest family, asterisk. I have spent my final year preserving what is most precious to me, our shared memories. In this box, you will find the complete, digitized history of all our happy moments together. It is my final gift to you. I hope that in looking back at these wonderful times, you will feel the same warmth and love that I always felt. With all my love, asterisk." "Mom," Rhiannon scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Happy moments. After this, she leaves me a pittance and a hard drive full of old pictures. What a joke." But I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. I knew my mother. Nothing she did was without purpose. This wasn't a joke. It was a punchline, carefully crafted and waiting to be delivered. That evening, the atmosphere in my mother's house was thick with a toxic cocktail of grief, anger, and a morbid curiosity. Rhiannon had insisted on being there. She paced the living room, her fury a palpable force, convinced the hard drives were some kind of leverage, a prelude to a hidden codicil in the will. I just wanted to understand Mom's final message. My wife, Sarah, set up her laptop and connected it to the large television. I plugged in the first drive, labeled simply 1970-1985. A moment later, the screen flickered to life. The first images were beautiful, poignant. My mother and father on their wedding day, young and impossibly happy. Me as a baby, chubby and laughing in a sun-drenched garden. The familiar warmth of nostalgia began to settle over us. Even Rhiannon stopped pacing, drawn to the silent slideshow. There were pictures of holidays, birthdays, ordinary Sundays. It was Sarah who noticed it first. A photo of Mom and me on a beach in Florida around 1982 flashed on the screen. We were building a sandcastle. "Wait," Sarah said, leaning forward. "That's odd. Look at the space next to you, Liam. It's empty. But your mom is looking at it like someone is there." I squinted. She was right. The composition was strange, unbalanced. Then the next picture appeared. A family Christmas, 1984. Mom, Dad, and I were gathered around the tree, opening presents. There was a conspicuous gap on the sofa between Dad and me, a space that felt like a missing tooth in a familiar smile. "Where am I?" Rhiannon whispered, her voice barely audible. I was there. I remember that hideous green sweater Dad bought me. The slideshow continued, a relentless, chronological march forward. A family portrait in a studio, with a professionally painted backdrop, now showed a family of 3. My 8th grade graduation, with Mom beaming at my side, her arm held out as if resting on a shoulder that wasn't there. With each new image, the truth dawned with a sickening, creeping horror. The slideshow moved into the drive labeled 1986-2000. My high school prom, my college graduation, my own wedding. In every group shot, every celebratory moment, there was a void, a person-shaped hole meticulously scrubbed from the fabric of our history. Then came the final, brutal confirmation. The drive labeled Rhiannon's Wedding, 2002. The first photo showed Rhiannon's ex-husband, handsome in his tuxedo, standing at the altar with his parents. Next to him, where his bride should have been, was nothing. Just the polished marble floor and the floral arrangements. Then, a picture of my mother, smiling her gentle, serene smile, dancing with an invisible partner at the reception, her hand held aloft by thin air. Rhiannon made a sound, a choked gasp that was part sob, part scream. Her face, illuminated by the ghostly light of the screen, had gone sheet white. All the anger, all the righteous indignation, drained away, replaced by a profound, terrifying emptiness. She finally understood. My mother hadn't yelled. She hadn't written a scathing letter detailing decades of hurt. She had done something far more absolute. With the quiet, methodical precision of a librarian, she had taken the official record of our family, and with a final, definitive act of curation, had simply checked her eldest daughter out. Permanently. Months later, while clearing out the last of Mom's belongings from the attic, I found them. The original physical photographs. They were all there, tucked away in their old shoeboxes, each one a testament to the history that truly was. I saw Rhiannon as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, as an awkward teenager, as a radiant bride. I closed the lid, sealed the box with heavy-duty tape, and stored it deep in the crawl space. I didn't have the heart to destroy them, but I couldn't bring myself to restore them to the official family narrative, either. I chose to honor my mother's final edit. I understood it wasn't an act of hatred. It was an act of self-preservation, the last desperate measure of a woman who, after a lifetime of being devalued, decided to protect the purity of her own memories. She was simply tidying up, creating a clean version of her life's story, free of the chapter that had caused her the most pain. Rhiannon never contested the will. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a hollowed-out silence. We haven't spoken since that night. Her absence from our family is no longer a digital illusion. It is a cold, hard reality. She has become what my mother made her, a void, a topic no one ever brings up. My mother, the quiet archivist, had the final say. In the end, she didn't seek revenge. She sought peace. And by silently, meticulously, and completely erasing the source of her pain, she gained ultimate control over her own story, leaving behind a legacy not of what was, but of what, in her heart, should have been. Thank you for listening to my story. It's important to remember that setting boundaries at any age is not an act of selfishness, but an act of dignity. If you have a story of your own, I encourage you to share it. You are not alone.